In 1984, three of the world's top leading evolutionary atheistic scientists showed up at a small hole-in-the-wall, dusty Texan creationist museum. What motivated them to go out of their way to visit this place? What was inside the museum that shocked them? I'm going to let Dr. Carl Baugh tell us this amazing story firsthand. And let me tell you something, folks. You're not going to believe who those three men were.
Early in the history of the Creation Evidence Museum, our profile was quite low. All we had was a one-room log cabin. And the door latch could be broken by any strong individual, but our trust is in the Creator himself. So I would leave the information there, go off to speak, and I was gone on a weekend lecturing, and the world's leading evolutionary scholars came unannounced. Richard Dawkins of Oxford, and Stephen J. Gould of Harvard, and James Farlow of Indiana University. And they came to see the evidence. Now, Richard Dawkins and Stephen J. Gould had published in the technical and the public literature that if we or anyone could really demonstrate academically that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, that would, according to their words, blow evolution out of the waters. And we have that in print. They're saying such. So they showed up and said, we want to see this evidence. Well, I was gone. My buddy Bob Summers had a key to the little museum. And so he sent his son, 17-year-old son, Temple, to let these guys in and see the evidence. Now, Richard Dawkins and Stephen J. Gould and James Farlow would never listen to me give a lecture. They wouldn't read anything that Creationists published. But here's a 17-year-old boy giving them a lecture on this creation evidence. And he showed them the hammer. We now have that under full security. Everything's under full security. But showed them the hammer and it deposited in early Cretaceous sandstone in central Texas. And they said, impossible. Well, Temple Summers, who's a mild-mannered individual. Then he showed them the finger that we have, a human finger, fossilized finger. It's an artifact found in the layering sedimentary deposit of the Cretaceous limestone assigned 110 million years in age. Showed them the finger. They said, impossible. And then they said, what's this? He said, well, that's a human footprint. It's the birding print. All 5 toes, medial, lateral, and all the arches, human, cuboid, calcaneus section, everything. Great toe, the 4 other toes, everything in the right place. So they first said, well, that's not Cretaceous limestone. Well, James Farlow is a specialist at that. So he looked at it closely and said, I don't know how to explain it, but it is Cretaceous limestone. And so Richard Dawkins said, a human footprint in the same layer with dinosaur footprints? Impossible. Temple said, sir, I know it's possible. I helped to excavate it. And they turned and walked away and haven't shown up since. And that's very unfortunate. First of all, their academic profile of honesty is at stake because they had said if it could be shown, then we'll embrace it. But they did not and could not because of their own paradigm, but especially because they did not want to give an account to a creator. We all must personally give an account to a creator.
I want to set it up because without you getting the setup, you're really not going to completely appreciate the uniqueness, the weirdness almost of this event that took place some 40 years ago. Temple Summers, who you're going to see in just a minute, was the one at the age of 17 that inadvertently, it wasn't planned, but he was asked, because Dr. Carl Baugh was out of the area at the time, to take these men through this small creation evidence museum to show them the evidence. I'm going to introduce him to you, and I want you to hear what Temple has to say. Temple, welcome to this program. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Go ahead and tell us what happened on that Sunday in 1984.
I was on my way to Sunday school, and I got a phone call from Jeannie Mack of the local Somerville County Museum. And she said that there were some gentlemen in from out of town, and she would recommend that I'd give them a tour. I'd given many tours up to that point, but on a Sunday, getting ready for Sunday school, I suggested that they come when the museum's open. And she, in a quiet voice, said, well, these men have traveled quite a distance to see it, and I would heavily recommend that you give them a tour. So begrudgingly, I went and opened the museum and waited a few moments for them to arrive. And there were actually 4 of them, the 3 that you mentioned, and then a Ron Hastings of a local area high school. So I gave them the tour. With the evidence that we had on hand, there was the fossilized finger. There was what is titled the Burdick print, and that was, yes, that. And then what is titled the Burdick print, one of the left-right stride prints that we excavated under 18 inches of limestone. So if anyone carved them, that was some pretty specialized tools. Being a sculptor myself, I don't know of a tool that exists that would do that kind of carving, but needless to say, they had impossible was their word of the day. And then, of course, the hammer and stone. Those were the primary evidence that we, indeed.
So we
that
have
is correct.
replicas of these. Yeah, we have replicas of these. And so you would show them each of these evidences, and then what was their reaction again?
Well, as soon as I would show them one of the items, the finger, for example, they would look at it, and then they would step back, and then they would huddle up with Gould and Dawkins facing me. Of course, at the time, I didn't know them from Adam, but then the other 2 with their backs to me, and they would discuss for a moment, and then they would come back, and then they would give their opinion of what it was. So as we went through the different evidence, we got to the Burdick print, and I said, this is in Cretaceous limestone, and Dawkins looked up and he said, that's not Cretaceous limestone. And what turned out to be Farlow examined it further and said, well, I don't know how to explain it, but it is Cretaceous limestone. And Dawkins' response was impossible. Impossible was the word that I got from most of the evidence that I presented to them. We went from there to the footprint, and at that time it had not been sectioned yet. I wish it had been. That would have quietened their discord. But he finally, after they looked at it and they determined, or Farlow verified that it was Cretaceous limestone. Impossible was the response I got back, and I said, all right, excuse me, friend, it's not impossible because I helped excavate that, and I explained the procedures we went through. 18 inches of limestone overburdened that had to be removed. Then we had to get down through the loose material down to the next layer, and there they were in a left-right stride, a number of prints. And it was common around here for people to realize that there's human prints because we've seen them all our lives. But to them, it was unheard of. And impossible, again, was we got to the last item, and that was the hammer. Well, the hammer, if you notice, there's 2 pieces of stone. The one piece has the impression of what remains with the larger piece. So I just took that piece and set it up on the counter and asked them if they could identify the material. And several different answers came back, but Ordovician was one of the ones that Farlow had suggested. Well, I then turned it over, and he said, they puzzled and looked at it and said that was an odd inclusion. I said, well, it was made even odder still by this piece, and then I set the hammer up there. And yeah, it was they got real quiet after that. As a matter of fact, that was on that note they left, and they just turned and quietly walked out. They didn't offer any other suggestions. Though, if I'm not mistaken, they did sign the guest registry, and that is I think that is how we found out who was there. But if not, then I'll have to. I don't really have a firm recollection of that. I've slept a couple of times since then, but I firmly recommend remember rather their quiet discussions, and then impossible was what they kept coming back with.
And let me just interject. The reason why impossible, for those of you that may not understand, their paradigm or the way they're looking at the strata that Temple is referring to, that this footprint, clearly a footprint in the stone, the strata, the Cretaceous limestone. Cretaceous, limestone is limestone, but Cretaceous puts it at a certain geological time frame. And the time frames that have been assigned by modern geology state that Cretaceous limestone, depending on where it is in the world or here in the United States, can be anywhere between 70 million years ago to 140 million years. And I've heard in the Paluxy River, Glen Rose, that area, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 108 million years. So a human footprint cannot be in Cretaceous limestone because from the evolutionary perspective, humans with human-like feet would not have developed until around 2 to 4 million years ago. Now, Creation Evidence Museum, the whole theme or the idea, and along with our museum as well too, is the idea that there was a worldwide flood some 4,400 years ago, and that Cretaceous limestone was limey mud either during or shortly after, and they found dinosaur prints. I mean, I measured them. Some of those prints are 13 inches deep in limestone. How in the world do you get 13 inches of mud? Well, I'm sure somebody can come up with some evolutionary response to that, but they're preserved, and there's human footprints in the same strata as the dinosaur prints. That means that humans lived 70 million years ago, or dinosaurs lived 4,400 years ago. Take your pick as to which paradigm you wish to believe. Temple, let me just give another thing. What was their overall general attitude, or what kind of vibe did you get from these guys when you were showing it, these things?
Confrontational, I guess, would be the probably the closest. There were some. They were inquisitive, and I mean they were curious enough that they traveled all the way from Harvard to Glen Rose. So, but they were stoic for sure.
Stoic. Interesting.
And they were, and then they left. No fanfare, just got in their cars and drove off.
Friend, Temple, thank you for sharing. Is there any other thoughts on that you'd like to share? Any other?
Well, I mean, the only other thing I would like to mention is that the reason that we're finding the prints here in Glen Rose is because there's almost it looked in the shape of a hand, the granite foundation under Texas, and the highest point of that middle finger that runs from Somerville County down to Llano, it was the highest point as the floodwaters were rising. And so it is along that point that these prints are found all in the same strata. And so it's plainly obvious to anyone who's willing to look at it objectively that this indeed was what was going on. And there were humans and there were dinosaurs, and they were very much panicking, looking for higher ground that they were not finding.
No.
And the only other thing I'll add to that is recently I've been associated back with the museum and was allowed to do some work, and we found some many samples of blood vessels. We also found nerve endings in dinosaur bones that were recovered, some locally and some not so. So there is viable material within the bone, and there's no way it's going to remain for millions of years. Just absolutely no way. So I'll just add that happened in the last couple of weeks, and every bone that we've sectioned, we are finding soft material.
So, folks, you really got to add this all up. Think about it for a second. a foot of limey mud, human and dinosaur in the same strata, assigned many millions of years, the same strata. And now local and other bones from outside the area, they're finding fresh material in it. Are these bones and these tracks 60, 70, 100 million years, or are they 4,400 years old?
It's like the Bible says. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Temple. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing with us. This is certainly a treat to hear.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
I wanted to hear it firsthand, and I'm sure there's some of you, the folks out here who are watching this, wanted to hear it firsthand too. And wow, what a story. Friends, this is not something that happens very often. Creationists rarely, like never, get by evolutionary, and these guys were not just, unnotables. They ended up having incredible careers. They're smart and they're very, very well studied. And to see them come to this kind of environment to check it out, I would love to be able to talk to one of them. Maybe we will, and find out what motivated them to come and take a look. So, all right. Well, thank you again. And remember, where did we come from? Apes, aliens, or Adam? And you will see you in the next video.